a humble housekeeper discovered that her millionaire boss was keeping his own blind father drugged and treated like a burden, just so he wouldn't lose control of the family fortune. When Claire summoned the courage to report the abuse, she risked her job, her daughter's livelihood, and her own safety. But what she didn't know was that God would use her voice to expose a cruel scheme, tear down masks, and restore dignity and sight to a wronged old man. Secrets hidden in locked folders, concealed recordings, and unlikely testimonies came to light, and the lives of everyone in that mansion changed forever in a way no one could have predicted, in a story of courage, justice, and faith. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and comment where you're watching from. Claire Anderson was 32 years old and had hands that knew every kind of grime money left behind. Hands calloused from scrubbing imported marble, polishing Venetian mirrors, and wiping down furniture that cost more than her entire year's salary. She had arrived at the Fletcher mansion 6 months ago, after years of bouncing from one cleaning job to another throughout the Bronx in New York City, always silent, always observant, always invisible like every woman who cleans other people's houses. The mansion was in Riverdale, a neighborhood where the walls were high and the automatic gates made the sound of a bank vault closing. Early in the morning, when Claire got off the bus on the main avenue, she could still smell the bread baking in the simple bakeries of the outer boroughs. But upon passing through the gate of the Fletcher estate, the air changed. It smelled of grass watered by an automatic irrigation system, of imported floor wax, of expensive perfume embedded in the Persian rugs. It was like entering another country, a country where she didn't have a passport, only an apron. Behind her gentle eyes, Claire held a contained courage that ached in her chest like an old ember. She also held a sense of justice that came from far away, from a poor but dignified childhood, from a mother who taught her that stealing was a sin, but letting your neighbor suffer in silence was an even greater one. In her apron pocket she always carried a wooden rosary worn from use, an heirloom from her grandmother. She prayed on the bus, eyes closed, as the vehicle rattled along the Cross Bronx Expressway. She prayed during her lunch break, sitting on a small stool in the utility area, her plate of already cold food in her hand. She prayed for protection, for courage, for the light to see what was right when everything seemed grey. What held Claire back was an old fear, a fear that had a first name, a last name, and a specific address in her memory. It was the fear of speaking up and no one listening, the fear of accusing and being called crazy, a liar, an opportunist, the fear of losing everything and being left with nothing, as had happened 8 years before when her grandfather fell ill. She had lived with him during his last months, had seen the strange signs, the food that disappeared from his plate without him eating it, the pills that changed color, the distant cousin who showed up with papers to sign. Claire was too young, too scared, and she kept silent. When her grandfather died, she discovered that the simple house in Yonkers had been transferred to the cousin's name. She was left with no inheritance, no home, nothing but the guilt that gnawed at her from the inside like termites in old wood. That's why, when her eyes first fell on Arthur Fletcher, something stirred within her. He was 80 years old, with thin white hair combed to the side, and delicate hands that trembled slightly as he held his coffee cup. His eyes were light, almost transparent, but they saw nothing. They said he was born blind, that he had never seen the light of day, that it was a sadness from God. To the family, Arthur was a silent burden, a name in a will, a handsome photo in a business magazine showcasing the kindness of the millionaire son who cared for his disabled father. To Claire, Arthur was something else. It was like seeing her grandfather sitting on the edge of the bed again, fumbling for the radio by touch, asking for water in a weak voice while she pretended not to notice that something was wrong. The first time she brought breakfast to his room, on the mansion's 2nd floor, Arthur thanked her in a gentle voice. She responded by describing the day outside. The sky was blue. There were birds in the garden. The jasmine was in bloom. He smiled. It was a small but genuine smile, as if no one had thought to do that before. Gradually, between one delivered coffee and another cleared away, between one opened curtain and another closed, the two formed a bond that didn't need eyes. Claire described the colors of the sunset filtering through the window, spoke of the sound of rain on the roof, and told him that the rose bush in the garden was budding with red flowers. Arthur responded with memories of smells, the smell of wet earth on the farm where he grew up, upstate New York, memories of sounds, the creak of the wooden gate, the lowing of cows at dusk, his mother's voice calling him for dinner. They were memories too vivid, too detailed, for someone who had supposedly never seen anything. Claire began to have two clear objectives, though she didn't yet know how to achieve them. The first was to prevent Arthur from being mistreated or neglected. She saw things. She saw the nurse, Carol, push the wheelchair with unnecessary force, making the old man's fragile body jolt. She saw the food tray return almost untouched, while Carol noted on the chart that he had eaten everything. She saw lately that Arthur seemed weaker, sleepier, with faint bruises on his thin arm, the kind that appear when someone grips too tightly. The second objective was to find out what was happening, because something was happening. Claire could feel it in the air, in the way Henry Fletcher, the millionaire's son who owned everything, looked at his father with poorly disguised impatience, in the way the elegant doctor, Dr. Morris, came and went from the house without ever greeting the staff, as if they were furniture, in the way Raphael, Henry's nephew and the official administrator of Arthur's assets, spoke on the phone about unnecessary costs and procedures that aren't worth it. But Claire ran into practical obstacles as hard as a concrete wall. The house had strict rules. Staff could only move in certain areas. Security cameras watched every corner, except for her room in the staff annex. Arthur's medications were kept locked in a metal box in Henry's office, and only Carol had the key. Claire's simple old cell phone had to be turned off during work hours, stored in a locker in the utility area. These were rules presented as security and organization, but in practice, they prevented any questioning. There was also the emotional obstacle, the biggest of all, the terror of being called a liar, a loser, an opportunist. The terror of being fired and having no way to support her 8-year-old daughter, Julia, who attended a private school on a scholarship and needed a uniform, supplies, and lunch money. The terror of returning to her previous situation when she slept on her sister's couch and woke up at 4 in the morning to catch 2 buses to work. Even so, something inside her wouldn't let her give up. She began to jot down details in a small notebook, the kind from a pharmacy, which she hid behind the cleaning supplies in the pantry closet. She noted times. 2 p.m. Carol entered the room with medicine. Arthur fell asleep shortly after. Woke up only at 6 p.m., confused. She noted observations. Bruise on left arm, thumb-sized. He said he didn't remember bumping into anything. She noted coincidences. Dr. Morris came on a Thursday night, wasn't on the schedule, left with an envelope. Claire listened to everything, saw everything, memorized everything. The old clock in the living room, for example, was exactly 10 minutes slow. She discovered this by comparing it with the digital clock in the kitchen. She memorized the routine of the faulty intercom, which made a crackling sound before ringing. She knew the exact time Arthur asked for his rosary to pray, always at 7 in the evening before dinner. She knew that when it rained, he became quieter, as if the memories hurt more. She knew he liked it when she hummed softly while tidying his room, because he said, her voice sounded like his mother's who had passed away 40 years ago. It was a silent urgency that Claire felt, like someone hearing an approaching train on the tracks before seeing it, an urgency that tightened her chest, that kept her awake at night, that made the rosary beads turn faster between her fingers during her prayers on the bus. She knew something had to be done, but she didn't know what, or how, or when. That Friday night, after closing the pantry windows and checking that all the doors were locked, Claire paused before the image of the Virgin Mary that Mrs. Peterson, the cook, kept on top of the refrigerator. The statue was illuminated by a small candle, which flickered and cast shadows on the wall. Outside, the imported cars slept in the garage. Inside, the silence of the rich seemed respectable, untouchable, protected by alarms and gates. Claire closed her eyes and whispered, her voice choked with the fear of her own courage, Lord, show me what is right. Show me, and give me the courage not to run away this time. Don't let me be silent again, please don't." The candle flickered, but it did not go out. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked once, twice, and then fell silent. The night continued, slow and heavy, full of secrets that had not yet come to light. The days at the mansion began before sunrise, when the sky over New York City was still a grayish-blue smudge, and the city took a deep breath before fully waking up. Claire would open the enormous living room curtains, the heavy velvet ones that required a cord to move, and see the imported cars sleeping in the garage outside. A black BMW, a silver Mercedes, a red Porsche that Henry rarely used but insisted on keeping polished. The silence of the rich at that hour still seemed respectable, almost sacred, as if money had power even over noise. In the industrial kitchen, with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, Mrs. Peterson was already stirring a large pot of porridge for Arthur's breakfast. She was 62, her body tired from 3 decades of cooking for wealthy people, and her eyes knew more than her mouth spoke. She wore a white hairnet, an impeccable apron, and had a way of chopping onions without crying that Claire found almost magical. As the wooden spoon swirled in the porridge, Mrs. Peterson commented softly, without looking at Claire, "That strong smell coming from Mr. Arthur's room yesterday, that wasn't medicine. It was something heavier." And she went back to stirring, as if she hadn't said anything at all. In the service elevator, the one the employers never used, the doorman Norman came up with groceries from the market. He was a tall, thin man in his 50s who wore reading glasses hanging around his neck and had a habit of writing everything down in a logbook at the front desk. While organizing the vegetables in the pantry, he mentioned to Claire that he had seen strange comings and goings in the early morning. "Dr. Morris arrived at 3 a.m. on Wednesday," he said, checking his notes. "He wasn't on the schedule, came straight in, didn't sign the visitor's log, left 40 minutes later with a folder under his arm." Norman wasn't one to make up stories. If he wrote it down, it happened. Claire began to collect signs like someone gathering crumbs from the floor after everyone has left the table. They were small details, the kind someone in a hurry wouldn't notice, but together they formed a disturbing picture. One Tuesday morning, while giving Arthur his bath, she noticed a strong smell of rubbing alcohol in the room, different from the usual hand sanitizer. The bedsheet had been changed, but there was a yellowish stain half hidden near the pillow, as if someone had spilled something and cleaned it up in a hurry. On Arthur's thin arm, near his shoulder, were old, yellowish marks and a new bruise, small but distinct, right where an injection is given. "Mr. Arthur, did you have an injection?" Claire asked gently, as she sponged his back with a soft sponge. "I don't know, my dear," he answered, his voice weary. "Sometimes I wake up and don't remember what happened. Carol says it's my age, that it's normal to forget things." But when Claire mentioned the nurse's new routine, Arthur's voice trembled. "She doesn't like it when I ask questions," he said quietly, almost ashamed. "She says stubborn old men are a drag." It was a small comment, but it hurt Claire like a slap in the face. Arthur was polite, kind, grateful for everything. To be treated like a burden, a drag, a weight was a silent cruelty that left no visible mark, but slowly killed a person's dignity. On the medicine tray, something didn't add up. Claire didn't understand medicine, but she could count and she could see. The pills changed places for no reason. On Monday, the white ones were on the left side of the organizer box. On Wednesday, they were on the right. There were times scribbled in pen over printed labels, as if someone had changed the prescription at the last minute. The lid of the metal box where they kept the vials, the one locked in Henry's office, was always slightly askew, as if someone opened it in a hurry and didn't close it properly. Meanwhile, the noise of status invaded the ground floor like loud music from a passing car. Parties, always parties. Henry hosted business friends for lunches that turned into dinners, with hired waiters serving French champagne and canapés that cost more than Claire's weekly salary. Laughter echoed from the pool area, electronic music played from built-in speakers, and men in dress shirts without ties smoked expensive cigars under the wooden pergola. Conversations about business, about stocks, about trips to Miami, about the new yacht someone had bought. Inside, Claire wiped up the champagne spills on the marble, collected half-full crystal glasses, and cleaned cigarette ashes that fell on the Persian rug. She was invisible. She could walk past a group of 10 men laughing loudly, and not one of them would turn their head. It was like being a ghost, but a ghost who had to clean up the mess of the living. The friction between her world and theirs was like the sound of a plate slowly cracking, a thin noise only those nearby can hear. Every burst of laughter was accompanied by a muffled sigh. Every extras. Toast was another hour of unpaid overtime. Every "get more ice, lady," said without looking at her face, was a reminder that here Claire had no name, no history, no importance. The first antagonists took shape with painful clarity. Carol, the nurse, was a woman in her early 40s, with her hair in a tight bun, manicured nails, and a cloying perfume. She treated Arthur with poorly disguised impatience, gripping his arm with unnecessary force when helping him up, sighing loudly when he asked her to repeat an explanation. Once Claire saw Carol push the wheelchair so hard that Arthur was startled and dropped his rosary on the floor. "Geez, what a heavy hand," the nurse complained as if it were his fault. Raphael, Henry's nephew and the official administrator of Arthur's assets, showed up twice a week with a leather briefcase and the air of someone with more important things to do. He spoke of his granduncle as if he were an Excel spreadsheet. "These costs for imported medication are weighing on the budget," he'd comment on the phone, pacing the living room. "We need to reevaluate what's really necessary." When he passed Arthur, he would greet him with a quick wave without stopping, without asking how he was. Still, not everything was darkness. Benevolent figures emerged, small lights in the gloom. Mrs. Peterson, despite fearing for her job, would let disapproving glances slip when she saw something wrong. Once, while serving Arthur's lunch, she commented loudly enough for Carol to hear, "An old man's food should be made with care, not in a hurry." It was a message, subtle but firm. Norman, the doorman, meticulously recorded everything at the front desk. The entry and exit times of every person, the license plate of every car, the phone number of every delivery person. He kept those old logbooks in chronological order in a drawer, because you never know when you might need to remember something, he'd say. He was a quiet but observant man, the kind who sees what others pretend not to. And there was Father John from the St. Jude parish in the neighboring area, a man in his 70s with a gentle voice and a always well-pressed cassock, who visited Arthur once a month to pray the rosary and talk. In recent visits, he had noticed the growing sadness on the old man's face, the way Arthur would fall silent in the middle of a prayer, lost in thought. "Are you all right, Mr. Arthur?" he would ask, and Arthur would always give the same answer, "I'm alive, Father." Sometimes that's already a lot. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, while tidying Arthur's room, Claire found a blood test report left on the side table. It was a crumpled piece of paper, stamped by a private lab, full of words she didn't understand. Blood count, platelets, sedimentation rate. But the dates were recent, from 2 weeks ago, and there was a handwritten note in the margin. "Check for medication interaction." What did that mean? Claire secretly photographed the paper with her phone, her heart pounding. It was also on a rainy afternoon that Arthur, while they were praying the rosary together, discreetly placed a small golden key in Claire's hand. It was the size of a padlock key, old and heavy. "Keep this," he murmured, his voice almost a whisper. "If one day I can't speak, you use this to defend me." Claire closed her hand over the key, feeling the cold metal against her skin. "Defend you from what, Mr. Arthur?" she asked. But he just shook his head and went back to praying. 2 unnamed turning points were planted there, 2 seeds of truth that still needed time to germinate. When Claire tried to ask about the medication days later, Carol humiliated her in front of the other staff. They were all in the kitchen. Mrs. Peterson, Norman, the other cleaner Andrea, the driver Paul. "The help doesn't need to meddle in health matters," Carol said loudly, pointing a finger. "Everyone stays in their lane. You take care of the cleaning, I take care of the patient." The words were accompanied by a mocking, little laugh, and Claire felt her face burn with shame. No one said anything. Mrs. Peterson looked down at her pot. Norman pretended to check something on his phone. The social humiliation, discreet and effective, did its job. To silence, to diminish, to shame. Later, Claire tried to photograph the medicines with the simple phone she kept hidden in the broom closet. But she was stopped by the house rule: phone use only during breaks and away from the bedrooms. Carol appeared at Arthur's door right on cue, as if she had a sensor. "What are you doing in here?" "With a cell phone?" she asked, her voice harsh. Claire made up a quick excuse, saying she had forgotten the device there that morning, but the nurse didn't believe her. She complained to Henry, who called Claire into his office and made it clear, "One more stunt like this and you're on the street." Even so, that night, after missing the last bus and walking 40 minutes to her rented apartment in Morrisania, Claire hugged her sleeping daughter. Julia was 8, with curly hair just like her mother's, and she slept clutching a worn-out teddy bear. The apartment was tiny, a one-bedroom, with a leak in the bathroom ceiling and a refrigerator that made too much noise. But it was theirs. Sitting on the edge of the bed, still in her uniform, Claire thought that this exhaustion was also part of the price of seeing what others pretended not to. She thought of the key hidden in the bottom of her purse. She thought of the photographed lab report. She thought of Arthur, alone in that enormous mansion, blind, frail, at the mercy of people who only saw him as a number, a cost, a problem. She thought and she prayed, and she decided that this time she would not be silent. Henry Fletcher was known in business magazines as a visionary. Time magazine had interviewed him 6 months earlier, with a photo of him, arms crossed, in front of his company's headquarters, a confident smile on his face, wearing an impeccable navy blue suit. The article spoke of his triumphant story. From the son of a visually impaired man to a real estate tycoon. It told how he grew up caring for his blind father, how it taught him responsibility, how he turned hardship into motivation. It was a beautiful, well-rounded, inspiring story. The cruel paradox was that his father, Arthur, who was truly blind, was kept as a showcase of filial piety in carefully staged photos. Henry made sure to post them on social media, always on Father's Day or the old man's birthday. Arthur sitting in his wheelchair, Henry beside him, a hand on his father's shoulder, with an emotional caption about gratitude and family. The comments poured in. "A model son. How beautiful. God bless you." Thousands of likes, shares. Social prestige converted into emotional profit. What no one saw, because no one wanted to see, was the deep-seated fear Henry carried, the fear of losing control of the accumulated fortune if his father regained a voice in decisions. Arthur still legally owned 40% of the construction company's shares. Henry managed everything through a broad power of attorney, signed years ago when his father's vision had worsened for good. But powers of attorney can be revoked. Wills can be changed. And a lucid old man, capable of signing papers, capable of questioning, capable of seeing, was a threat. The ophthalmologist, Dr. Morris, was the functional accomplice in this machine. Elegant, always elegant, graying hair combed back, designer glasses, silk tie, Italian shoes. His office was on the Upper East Side, in a luxury clinic with marble floors and a receptionist who offered coffee in a porcelain cup. He made scheduled visits to the Fletcher mansion every Thursday at 10 in the morning, punctual as a Swiss watch. He would go straight up to Arthur's room, spend half an hour inside, come down with a leather briefcase under his arm, and always leave with a discreet envelope, the kind that fits in the inner pocket of a suit jacket. To him, Arthur's condition was stable and irreversible. He used those exact words in a calm, professional voice in response to any question about the possibility of surgery. Mr. Arthur's condition is stable and irreversible. Any intervention would be too risky at his age. Behind the technical words were generous contracts. Henry's construction company provided consulting services to 3 private hospitals where Dr. Morris practiced, with fees that let the doctor sleep very well at night. It was a comfortable, clean arrangement, with no visible blood, no explicit violence, just well-compensated omission. The first major shift in the course of events happened on a Sunday afternoon, the last week of September, when the sky over New York City was that washed-out blue after the rain, and the neighborhood streets seemed quieter than usual. The family was out for a business lunch at the local equestrian club. Henry, his wife, Raphael, and their friends. Only the on-duty staff remained at the mansion. Claire, Norman at the front gate, and the other cleaner, Andrea, who was cleaning the outdoor area. With the key Arthur had given her, hidden for weeks in the bottom of a makeup bag she never used, her hands sweating, trembling like a leaf in the wind, Claire discreetly entered Henry's office. The solid mahogany door creaked softly. The smell of the leather armchairs and waxed wooden floor contrasted with the weight in her chest, with the fear that tightened her throat. "Dear God, protect me," she whispered, making the sign of the cross. The office was spacious, with a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf, a massive rosewood desk, and expensive paintings on the wall. Claire knew she had little time. 10 minutes, at most, before someone noticed her absence. She went straight to the lateral filing cabinet, that old piece of furniture with deep drawers. The key worked. The lock turned with a metallic click that seemed too loud in the silence of the house. In the back of the second drawer, she found a thick green cardboard folder marked with a white label that read in handwriting, "Arthur Fletcher, Medical." Claire's hands were shaking so much she almost dropped the folder. She opened it right there, standing, without even sitting in the leather chair. Inside, old reports revealed something that dismantled the official story like a house of cards. The first document was a hospital record from 1952, when Arthur was 7. Diagnosis: bacterial eye infection, inadequate. Treatment: severe sequelae in both eyes. Claire didn't understand all the terms, but she understood the gist. Arthur was not born blind. He had seen the world. He had seen colors, his mother's face, the blue of the sky, the green of the trees. And he had lost his sight gradually due to a poorly treated illness at a time when poor people from the countryside didn't have access to good doctors. Further on, recent exams from 3 years ago, possibility of partial vision recovery through cataract surgery in the right eye with lens implant, favorable prognosis. Considering age and general health conditions. There was a handwritten note in the margin. In handwriting Claire recognized as Dr. Morris's. Family opted to postpone procedure. Opted. As if Arthur had been part of the decision, as if anyone had asked him if he wanted to see again. There was more. Prescriptions for medications that had been changed over the last 6 months, always signed by Dr. Morris, always with technical justifications that seemed reasonable at first glance. But Claire noticed a pattern. The dosage of anxiety medication had been increased 3 times, as had the sleeping pills. And there was a recent addition of something called a mild sedative for agitation control. Arthur was not agitated. Arthur was the gentlest man Claire had ever known. As she tried to read, stumbling over the words, her heart racing, Henry's footsteps echoed in the hallway. Unmistakable. His dress shoes tapping on the wooden floor, the firm rhythm of someone coming home earlier than expected. Claire was almost caught. Panic rose like a wave. She hurriedly closed the folder, put it back in the drawer, turned the key but had no time to leave. She hid behind the large bookshelf, the one full of law and business books, holding her breath. Henry entered the office, talking on the phone. "No, I'll be back at the club in a bit. Just came to get some documents." He was there for 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours. He opened another drawer, took an envelope, and left. Claire waited another 2 eternal minutes before moving, her legs wobbly, cold sweat running down her back. She left the office like a ghost, closed the door slowly, and went down the stairs holding onto the railing because her legs wouldn't support her properly. She went straight to her staff room in the annex, locked the door, sat on the bed and cried. She cried from fear, from anger, from helplessness. She cried remembering her grandfather, who had suffered alone in a stuffy room in an old house, while she, too young and too scared, had said nothing. She cried thinking of Arthur, blind when he didn't have to be, drugged when he didn't have to be, stuck in a wheelchair in a house that felt more like a luxury prison. But she also wrote. She wrote down everything she had managed to read in her hidden notebook with a trembling hand. Dates, names of medications, technical terms she had copied without fully understanding. Then she hid the notebook, along with the key, inside the pillowcase of the old pillow she would take to wash the next day. That night, sitting on the edge of the tiny bed in her rented apartment, watching her daughter sleep with the worn-out teddy bear, Claire thought about quitting. She thought about running away from that house that smelled of polished lies, of injustice in a tie, of cruelty with imported perfume. She thought it was too dangerous, that it would lead to nothing, that she was just a housekeeper, and no one would believe her word against that of a rich businessman, a famous doctor, a powerful family. But life's subplots did not stop unfolding. The following Monday, Norman commented on Dr. Morris's unscheduled late-night visits, always in the dead of night, always without signing the visitor's log. 3 times this month, he said, showing his notebook, always between 2 and 4 in the morning, and he always leaves in less than an hour. Mrs. Peterson started having high blood pressure spells from the stress, needing to go to the health clinic twice that week, but she kept paper napkins with notes on Arthur's meal times and intake. "Look here, Claire," she showed her one day in the kitchen. "Tuesday lunch 11:30 a.m., but the plate came back full. Dinner 6 p.m., came back half-eaten. Wednesday breakfast at 8 a.m. came back almost untouched. This isn't a lack of appetite. This is someone being deprived of food." At the parish, during a Sunday Mass Claire attended before work, an elderly woman with white hair commented to Father John about a relative who had regained partial sight at 75 after cataract. Surgery at a public clinic. "It was a miracle, Father," the woman said, emotional. "He could see his grandchildren's faces again." The priest listened attentively and at the end of the Mass called Claire over. "How is your Mr. Arthur?" he asked. And Claire, for the first time, told him a little of what she was seeing. All these threads were tying themselves together, discreetly, firmly, around the same question. Why keep Arthur in the dark if there was a chance of light? Henry, sensing that someone was watching too closely, that something was different in the air, changed the staff's shifts. He forbade long conversations with his father. He ordered Carol to accompany all of Claire's trips to Arthur's room, even if it was just to change a glass of water. Claire's personal limitations weighed on her like a stone. Little formal education, a fear of police stations, a terror of signing any paper because once, years ago, she had signed a receipt and later discovered it was a confession of debt. But the seemingly favorable coincidences continued. The forgotten lab report, the key given by Arthur, the conversation at church, Norman's notes, Mrs. Peterson's napkins, they were like seeds planted on previous days, slowly germinating, as if life itself were pushing Claire towards the truth, one step at a time, unhurriedly, but without pause. And Claire, kneeling before the image of the Virgin Mary in the empty kitchen at 6 in the morning on a cold Thursday, whispered with a firm voice for the first time, "I'm going to do something. I don't know what yet, but I will. For my grandfather, who I left alone. For this old man who is alone now. For myself, because I need to look in the mirror and respect myself. I will." The candle flickered, but it did not go out. It was on a Friday night, the last in October, that the mansion seemed more vulnerable than ever. The family had gone out for a gala event at the Morgan Library and Museum, a black tie affair with tuxedos and long gowns, champagne and speeches about philanthropy. Henry, his wife Marianne, Raphael, and half a dozen business friends. They left at 7 p.m. in 3 cars, leaving behind only the trusted staff, Claire, Norman at the gate, and the driver Paul, who had returned to pick up something he'd forgotten and then left again. Outside, the wealthy neighborhood slept behind high, ivy-covered walls, with security cameras blinking their little red lights every 5 seconds. Inside, the feeling was that every noise had an owner. Every step echoed too loudly. Every breath could be heard. Claire felt with almost physical clarity that the time for hesitation was over. It was now or never. It was either act or spend the rest of her life wondering, what if I had done something? She took her old cell phone, that Nokia with a cracked screen she usually left uncharged in the broom closet, and secretly charged it all afternoon using a charger Norman had lent her. She wrapped the device in a clean dish towel, red with white stripes, as if it were just another utensil in the housekeeper's hand. She tested the recording function in the service bathroom, speaking softly, "Hello, hello, testing." The voice came out muffled but audible. It would have to do. Using the excuse of checking if all the windows were locked because of a predicted thunderstorm, she entered Arthur's room at the time they always prayed the rosary together. It was 8 o'clock. The light from the table, lamp cast soft shadows on the wall. Arthur was sitting in the green velvet armchair near the window, the wooden rosary beads between his fingers. When he heard her footsteps, he smiled. "Claire, my dear, I thought you weren't coming today." "I'm here, Mr. Arthur," she replied, sitting in the chair beside him. "I brought my grandmother's rosary. Shall we pray together?" And they began. Our Father, Hail Mary, the beads sliding between their calloused fingers. But between one prayer and the next, Claire asked different questions. She asked about his childhood, about colors, about the sky in upstate New York where he grew up. "Do you remember what the sky was like there, Mr. Arthur?" To her surprise, Arthur didn't hesitate. "I do," he said, his voice coming to life. "It was a deep blue, you know. Blue like those old church tiles. In the summer, it would get even lighter, almost white from the strong sun." Claire continued, her heart racing. "And were there trees there?" "There was a huge mango tree in the yard. The leaves were that dark, deep green. When the wind blew, the shadow would dance on the ground." His voice was emotional now. "And I had a red bicycle, bright red, that my father bought me when I turned 6. I remember how it shined in the sun." These were the memories of someone who had seen the world. Someone who knew colors, not from hearing about them, but from having seen them with his own eyes. The cell phone, propped discreetly on the dresser, hidden behind an old photo frame, recorded every word, every detail, every living proof that the official story was a lie. Later, around 9:30, Dr. Morris arrived for an unscheduled visit. Norman announced him over the intercom, surprised. Henry called from the event on his cell saying he had asked the doctor to do a quick checkup, that he would be back soon to talk to him. He went straight up to the room in a dark suit, leather briefcase in hand, smelling of expensive aftershave. Claire was in the hallway pretending to arrange the china cabinet near the stairs. She saw the doctor enter Arthur's room and close the door. She waited 5 minutes. Henry arrived 15 minutes later, taking the stairs 2 at a time, annoyed at having left the event. He entered the room without knocking. The door was left ajar. It was then that Claire did the riskiest thing of her life. She left the dish towel with the recording cell phone on the high-backed chair next to the door, as if she had forgotten it there. The chair was dark wood with red upholstery, and no one used it. The towel was draped naturally, but the phone was positioned to capture sound. The conversation that unfolded inside was hard to listen to, even filtered through the wooden door. Claire stayed in the hallway, pretending to fold towels in the linen closet. Less than 10 feet away, the voices were muffled but clear enough. "Do you still think this surgery is worth it?" It was Henry's voice, impatient. "Technically, yes." Dr. Morris's calm voice. "He has a real chance of recovering partial vision in his right eye. But how much will it cost? And the post-op care, what if he starts asking questions, wanting to look at papers, at the companies?" A long pause. Then the doctor. "Henry, you need to understand that we're treading on delicate ground here. Legally, he has a right to treatment. Legally." Henry's voice was filled with contempt. "Doctor, my father is 80 years old. He's used to the dark. To start messing with wills, guardianships, powers of attorney, all for an old man who might live another 5-10 years? It's not worth it." It was the undeniable confirmation of what Claire had feared. It wasn't about health, it wasn't about well-being. It was about control. It was about money. It was about keeping Arthur blind and quiet so that nothing would change. The obstacles followed, as fast as falling dominoes. A power outage plunged the mansion into darkness. The predicted storm had arrived with force. Wind battering the windows, thunder cracking the sky. In the sudden darkness, Arthur became confused, disoriented. He tried to get up on his own, searching for the rosary that had fallen to the floor. Claire had to run up the stairs blindly, her heart in her mouth. The utility area was wet because a window had been left open and the rain had gotten in. She slipped, twisted her ankle, and felt a sharp pain shoot up her leg. But she kept going. She limped up, holding onto the railing, calling out, "Mr. Arthur, I'm coming, stay still." She reached the room just as he was standing, dizzy, trying to get his bearings in the total darkness. She supported his thin body with her own, almost falling with him, but managed to sit him back down in the armchair. Easy, easy. I'm here, she repeated, her voice trembling. Her ankle throbbed, swelling inside her shoe. At the same time, she knew the security cameras had their own generator. The emergency lights had come on in the hallway. Any movement in a forbidden area, anything out of the ordinary, could be used against her. Henry and Dr. Morris had gone downstairs to check what had happened. When the power came back on 10 minutes later, Carol appeared from her house next door, drawn by the commotion. It was she who caught Claire too close to Arthur's room, her ankle visibly swollen, and immediately complained to Henry. "She was up here alone with your father. That's not allowed. The rules are clear." Henry, annoyed with everything, the blackout, the storm, having left the event for nothing, unleashed his anger on Claire. He called her into the living room in front of Norman, who had come up to help, in front of Carol, who watched, with her arms crossed. "A housekeeper who oversteps her bounds doesn't stay here. Do you understand? One more stunt like this, and you're out without a reference letter, without anything." The cost of that night was high. Physical pain in an ankle she could barely stand on. Concrete, palpable fear of being fired without cause, without rights, without anything. Suspicious looks from Carol, who began to watch her every move. The feeling of being watched all the time, like a rat in a glass cage. But tucked deep in her apron pocket, wrapped in the dish towel she had discreetly retrieved when everyone was busy with the generator, was the cell phone, with 2 recordings that could change everything. The first, Arthur describing colors, visual memories impossible for someone born blind. The second, Henry and Dr. Morris openly discussing not performing the surgery for financial and control reasons, not medical ones. At the front gate, Norman had done something no one had noticed. Hours before the blackout, suspecting something might happen that night, he had discreetly adjusted the angle of one of the security cameras in the second-floor hallway. Instead of filming the office door, it now filmed the stairwell, reducing the risk of compromising Claire if she needed to go up in a hurry. It was a small, almost invisible act, but it meant she wasn't completely alone. In the kitchen, during the blackout, Mrs. Peterson had a high blood pressure spell. Or at least, that's what she said, putting a hand to her chest and sitting down asking for help. Carol had to come down to attend to her, take her blood pressure, give her medicine, and stay there for about 20 minutes. It was exactly the time Claire needed to be alone with Arthur, to ask the questions, to record the conversation. Mrs. Peterson never said a word, but when Claire passed her later in the pantry, the cook just gave her a slow, silent wink. When she finally got home, it was past midnight. Julia was sleeping at a neighbor's house. The apartment was empty, dark, cold. Claire slowly took off her shoes, saw her bruised and swollen ankle, and cried. She cried from pain, from exhaustion, from fear. But she also felt, for the first time in weeks, something like hope. She put the cell phone in her underwear drawer under everything. She put the notebook with her notes alongside it. She lay down on the bed without even taking off her uniform, an improvised ice pack on her ankle, and prayed. She prayed, giving thanks for the protection, for the silent allies, for the courage that had come from who knows where. And she prayed for strength for what was to come, because now, with proof in hand, the next step would be to step out of the shadows and into the light, and that, she knew, would be the most dangerous part of all. On Monday morning, her ankle still sore but wrapped. In a bandage a neighbor had lent her, Claire got off the bus in downtown Manhattan. The bright November light hit the glass buildings, the cars stuck in traffic, the sidewalks crowded with people in a hurry. The city's noise was deafening after the controlled silence of the mansion. Horns honking, street vendors shouting, music blasting from stores, a jackhammer breaking asphalt 2 blocks away. She was accompanied by Father John, who carried a simple blue plastic folder, the kind that costs a few dollars at a stationery store. Inside, her notebook of annotations, copies of the names of medical exams she had managed to write down, and the old cell phone with the 2 recordings. Claire wore the best clothes she owned, black slacks she'd bought at a thrift store, a white long-sleeved blouse, and closed-toe black shoes. She had spent the previous night washing and ironing them, because she knew that appearance matters, especially when you're poor and need to be taken seriously. The public defender's office was in a 10-story grey building on Center Street, with a line at the door and a security guard asking for ID. They took an elevator to the 4th floor where the elder abuse unit was located. The waiting room had blue plastic chairs, all occupied, and smelled of old coffee and floor cleaner. On the walls were posters about rights, about reporting abuse, about protective laws. They were seen by a young law intern named Anna Louise. She was about 25, with her hair in a ponytail, glasses, and a university t-shirt under her black blazer. When Claire handed her the folder and began to tell her story, her voice trembling at first, but growing steadier as she went on, Anna Louise listened with eyes that started to well up. "My grandmother," she said when Claire finished speaking, "died in a nursing home. We reported abuse, but no one took it seriously. By the time we got her out, it was too late." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry. It's just, this story hits close to home." Anna Louise played the audio right there in the small office. First, Arthur's voice describing colors, the green mango tree, the blue sky of upstate New York, the red bicycle. Then, heavier, the conversation between Henry and Dr. Morris, where it was clear that the surgery was not being done for reasons of financial convenience and control, not for medical impossibility. When the audio finished, Anna Louise was on her feet, pacing the small room. "This is serious, very serious." The facts began to be validated step by step, with the precision of a police investigation. The intern requested, through an official letter from the Public Defender's Office, copies of medical reports from the hospitals mentioned in Arthur's papers. Mount Sinai Hospital confirmed exams from 3 years ago, indicating the possibility of surgery. New York Presbyterian Hospital confirmed a recent consultation where Dr. Morris had ordered new tests but had never collected the results. The front gate logs, which Norman kept with religious care in notebooks organized by month, showed Dr. Morris's visits at odd hours. Early mornings, weekends, always off the official schedule. Norman was called to give an informal statement and brought 3 notebooks with notes in neat handwriting. 0914, Dr. Morris, entry 02:35 a.m., exit 03:20 a.m., did not sign log. 0921, Dr. Morris, entry 11:50 p.m., exit 12:40 a.m., left with manila envelope. There were dozens of such entries. The changes in the menu noted by Mrs. Peterson on loose sheets of notebook, paper to organize her monthly shopping, revealed periods when Arthur received less food. The cook had a habit of writing everything down. Week of 0912, porridge, 3 servings not consumed. Lunch, 4 plates returned full. Dinner, 5 plates half eaten. Comparing these with the dates in Claire's notebook, they coincided exactly with phases when the old man was sleepier, weaker, more subdued. Nothing came from nowhere. Everything fit together like pieces of a puzzle that were already on the table, just waiting for someone brave enough to assemble them. A public defender, Mr. Davies, a man in his 50s, bald, with round glasses and a loosened tie, asked to speak informally with Henry. He called the construction company, scheduled a meeting for clarification regarding the situation of Mr. Arthur Fletcher. Henry arrived with 2 lawyers in suits, leather briefcases, and an air of someone doing a favor by showing up. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Claire and Father John waited outside, in the hallway of the public defender's office, sitting on the hard plastic chairs. When Henry left, his face was red. He walked past Claire without looking at her, but she heard him say to his lawyers in the elevator, "This is absurd. She wants money, it's obvious. I'm going to sue everyone for defamation." At home, the pressure mounted. Henry cancelled all staff days off until further notice. He would cross his arms in front of Arthur during meals, as if his father were to blame for everything that was happening. Carol became even more aggressive, treating Claire with open contempt, speaking loudly for everyone to hear. Some people don't know their place. They think they can play detective. But the wheels of justice, slow as they were, had begun to turn. The district attorney's office opened a case in the elder care court. A young, serious prosecutor requested an independent medical evaluation of Arthur. The news leaked. It's unknown how, but it leaked. It spread among the residents of the luxury-gated community, among the members of the club, among the family's acquaintances. Some condemned Henry with indignation. "Imagine doing that to your own father." Others defended him with the same indignation. It's all an exaggeration from a housekeeper trying to pull a scam. Every step forward came at a high price. Claire lost 2 days' pay for missing work to attend the preliminary hearing at the public defender's office. She had to bring documents, give statements, repeat her story 3 times to 3 different people. She would come home late, exhausted, and still have to take care of Julia, cook dinner, do laundry. Her daughter started to hear comments at school. "Is your dad a criminal?" her classmates would ask, confusing the rumors. "My mum said you're going to be poor because your mum is suing rich people." Julia would come home crying, and Claire would have to explain in simple words that she was doing the right thing, that helping those who suffer is never wrong, even when it hurts. The fear of not being heard returned with force, especially in formal meetings. Well-dressed lawyers in suits and ties used terms she didn't understand: guardianship, conservatorship, incapacitation, legal capacity. Anna Louise translated patiently, but Claire still felt tiny in those large rooms, with long wooden tables, cold air conditioning, and important people deciding the fate of ordinary people. On the day she had to give her official testimony in a room at the New York County Supreme Court, Claire almost gave up. She woke up with a stomachache, threw up her breakfast, and had to sit on the edge of her bed with her head in her hands. Julia, 8 years old, put her small hand on her mother's shoulder and said, "You're brave, Mom. You can do it." She arrived at the courthouse half an hour early, accompanied by Father John and Anna Louise. The hallway smelled of old paper and floor wax. People were waiting on wooden benches, lawyers chatted in groups, security guards checked bags. The ceiling was high with old chandeliers, and the sound echoed. She took a deep breath in the hallway, her hands cold and sweaty, her heart racing. The public defender, Mr. Davies, came out of the room and asked if she wanted some time to calm down, a glass of water, to use the restroom. She looked through the ajar door and saw Arthur. He was sitting in a wheelchair, brought there by court order to attend the hearing. He wore simple clothes, a white button-down shirt, old dress pants. The wooden rosary was between his trembling fingers. His face was thin, tired, but with an expression of someone paying close attention to everything, even without seeing. Claire made her decision right there. She entered the room, with trembling legs but a firm voice. She sat in the indicated chair, facing the judge, a man in his 60s with glasses and a black robe. Beside him, the prosecutor, a young woman with short hair. On the other side, Henry's lawyers, 3 men in grey suits with bored expressions. The questions began: how long she had worked at the house, what she had observed, why she decided to report it, if she had a financial interest in it, if someone had encouraged her. Claire answered everything, looking into the eyes of the person asking. She told them what. She saw the bruises on Arthur's arm, the food that came back untouched, the medications changed without explanation, the strong smell of rubbing alcohol, the doctor's late-night visits. She told them what she heard. Arthur describing colours that only someone who has seen can describe. Henry and Dr. Morris openly discussing that it wasn't worth doing the surgery because of the will and the company, not because of his health. She told them why she decided to speak up. "Because I stayed quiet once before. I let my grandfather suffer alone. And when he died, I couldn't forgive myself. I wasn't going to let that happen again." She didn't embellish. She didn't invent. She didn't cry, though the urge was strong. When the questions ended, almost an hour later, she simply made the sign of the cross, silently, with a trembling hand. Outside, in the hallway, Father John was waiting. He just squeezed her shoulder firmly, as if to say that faith is also proven in the corridors of a courthouse, not just on church pews. Anna Louise was beaming. "You were incredible," she said, hugging Claire tightly. "Truly incredible." Claire leaned against the cold hallway wall and finally let the tears come. She cried with relief, with exhaustion, with the fear that was still present, but also with something new, something she hadn't felt in years, the feeling of having done the right thing, no matter the cost. Inside the room, Arthur, who had heard everything without seeing anything, clutched his rosary so tightly that his knuckles turned white. and for the first time in years, he smiled. 6 months later, life had a different rhythm, a different smell, a different color. Arthur no longer lived in the Riverdale mansion, with its high walls and controlled silence. By court order, after 3 hearings, 2 medical evaluations, and a detailed report from a social worker, he moved into a simple ground-floor apartment in Fordham, a more humble but vibrant neighborhood in the Bronx. The apartment was on a quiet, tree-lined street where neighbors greeted each other on the sidewalk and children played tag in the small park on the corner. It was an old building, only 3 stories high, with no elevator, and a tiny lobby where the doorman, Mr. Mario, knew everyone by name. The apartment itself had 2 bedrooms, a living room and a kitchen, all simple, but airy, with large windows that opened onto a small shared backyard with a mulberry tree and a communal clothesline. The guardianship was reviewed in a process that lasted months. Henry lost exclusive administration of his father's assets. A court-appointed conservator now supervised Arthur's finances, with quarterly monitoring by a social worker. Henry was ordered by the court to cover all of his father's expenses: rent, medication, food, and a caregiver. In addition, he was facing charges for neglect, which was still moving slowly through the criminal court, but had already resulted in a heavy fine and a public reprimand. A surgery, carefully evaluated by a medical team from a top public hospital, had restored partial vision to Arthur. It wasn't perfect vision, far from it. The doctors explained in technical terms: cataract removed, lens implanted, satisfactory result for his age. What this meant in practice was that Arthur didn't see like a young man, but he could distinguish shapes, large forms, and the brightness from the window when the sun shone strongly. And most importantly, he could recognize the blurred outline of beloved faces when they came close enough. The first time he managed to recognize Claire's tied-back hair, 3 weeks after the surgery, his eyes still sensitive to light, still wearing sunglasses indoors, he pointed at her with a trembling finger and laughed like a child. "You're a brunette," he said, amazed. I knew it from your voice, but now I see." His voice broke with emotion. "I can see you, my dear," Claire cried. She cried right there, in front of him, without shame, without holding back. For medicine, this was an expected outcome, another statistical success story. For Arthur's heart, for her heart, it was a true miracle, a miracle that comes from God, yes, but also from the courage of those who do not remain silent in the face of injustice. Claire now worked formally as Arthur's caregiver, with a proper contract and a set schedule, Monday to Friday, from 8 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, with an hour for lunch. She earned a fixed salary, had benefits, a retirement plan, paid time off. The notebook that was once hidden behind cleaning supplies became an official log of medications, medical appointments, and small observations about daily life. The social worker, Mrs. Beatrice, an organized woman with glasses and colorful spreadsheets, praised her dedication. "You care for him as if he were family," she would say. And Claire would always reply, "That's because he is family. We choose our family too." On Saturday evenings, when her official work was done but her affection continued, Claire would take Arthur out to the sidewalk. She would place his wheelchair in front of the building, under the shade of the almond tree, and the two would sit there, feeling the breeze. Arthur would close his eyes, not because he couldn't see, but because he liked to feel the fresh air on his face, the sounds of the street, the smell of food coming from the windows. Julia played with other children nearby, running, laughing, being a child. Every now and then, she would stop to show Grandpa Arthur a drawing, a flower she had picked, a colorful pebble. The house was small, even cramped, but it had something the mansion never had, a sense of belonging. There was the smell of Mrs. Peterson's cooking. She now lived in the same building, 2 floors up, retired after 40 years of working for others. She came down every day to make Arthur's lunch, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She would cook while humming old songs, taste the food with her wooden spoon, adjust the salt, the seasoning, the texture of the rice. "Food made with love feeds the soul too," she would say. There was the good night from Norman, who sometimes stopped by at the end of his shift on his way back from his new job as a doorman at a commercial building near the subway station. He would sit on the sidewalk with Arthur, and they would talk about baseball, the weather, about life. Norman had brought his logbooks as evidence in the case, and now he kept them like a trophy, a reminder that attention to detail can save lives. There were the discreet visits from Anna Louise, who continued to follow the case even after graduating, now as a real lawyer working for an elderly rights organization. She would bring papers for Arthur to sign, explain each term with patience, and make sure he understood everything. Sometimes she stayed for coffee, talking with Claire about other cases, other injustices they were trying to correct. On the wall of the small living room, above the two-seater, sofa Claire had bought at a second-hand store. The old clock that had always been 10 minutes slow in the mansion now showed the correct time. Arthur had made a point of getting it fixed, taking it to a watchmaker on the next street who charged $20 for the service. He insisted on hearing its tick-tock, as if confirming that time, though it had been delayed, still had good things to deliver. "This clock has been with me for 50 years, he would tell anyone who would listen. Now it's working right again, just like me, on the old wooden dresser at the entrance of the apartment. The old key to Henry's office rested on a small keychain next to a miniature rosary. It was a silent reminder of doors that were opened at the cost of tears, courage, and faith. Claire would sometimes look at that key and remember everything, the fear, the hesitation, the moment she decided not to be silent. She kept it like a war medal. Henry, by the judge's express order, and by his own unease that had begun to disturb his sleep, visited his father once a week, every Thursday at 6 in the evening. He would arrive by car alone without lawyers. The conversations were short, full of long pauses, but they happened. Henry would ask about his health, about the medications, about what his father needed. Arthur would respond politely without excessive resentment, but also without feigning an intimacy that wasn't there. "Are you okay, Dad?" Henry would ask, standing in the living room, not sitting down. "I am," Arthur would reply. "I can see a little. That's more than I ever expected to have again." A silence, then, I was wrong, Dad. I was very wrong." Arthur didn't deny. It didn't grant easy absolution. He would simply say, "You were my son, but there's still time to do things differently." It wasn't immediate forgiveness, the kind you see in movies. It was a procedural, difficult forgiveness that had to be built brick by brick. Dr. Morris had his medical license suspended for 18 months. The State Medical Board, after an investigation, concluded there had been a willful omission of information and an undeclared conflict of interest. He now worked at free health clinics in low-income neighborhoods, volunteer work mandated as part of his punishment. He was learning to look into the eyes of people who couldn't pay, people who depended on public aid, people who waited hours in line to be seen. He was learning, late but learning, that medicine is not a business, it's a mission. The consequences came, firm, proportional, without spectacle or excessive revenge. There was no death, no violence, no Hollywood ending with the villain destroyed. There was justice. There was accountability. There was real change, the kind that hurts but transforms. On a Sunday afternoon in April, as autumn painted the New York sky with that soft orange that announces the end of the day, the sun settled serenely over the tiny apartment balcony. Claire was washing the shared backyard with a hose, the water making the pleasant sound of artificial rain. Julia was drawing on the ground with colored chalk, making huge flowers, houses with chimneys, and a sun with a happy face. Arthur was sitting in the wooden rocking chair, the one the carpenter down the street had refurbished for $100. He clutched his worn wooden rosary, the beads sliding slowly between his fingers. He strained his eyes, blinking against the strong late-afternoon light, trying to distinguish the two figures in front of him. Julia ran to Claire, took her hand and showed her the drawing. They stood there, hand in hand, the little girl explaining every detail of her art. When Arthur finally perceived the scene, when his blurred but present vision captured the outline of the two, mother and daughter, embracing, laughing at something simple, a wide smile spread across his wrinkled face. It was a true smile, the kind that comes from within, that shines even without perfect teeth. He slowly raised the rosary as if hoisting a flag of silent victory, and he murmured, his voice firm but full of gratitude, for anyone who wanted to hear, for anyone who wanted to keep it in their heart. For Claire, who was wiping away tears of joy with the back of her wet hand. God may take his time, my dear. He may take so long that we think he's forgotten us, that he isn't seeing, that he isn't listening. But when he finally arrives, he brings with him the justice we didn't even know we deserved. He brings back dignity. He brings back the light. And he brings good people, brave people like you who weren't afraid to do the right thing even when everything seemed wrong. Claire sat on the ground beside his chair, still in her apron, her hands still wet from the hose. She rested her head lightly on the arm of the rocking chair and closed her eyes. Julia came running, sat on her mother's lap, and the three of them stayed there, in silence. The living room clock read 6:15, the correct time. The rosary continued to turn, slowly, in Arthur's hands. The wind rustled the leaves of the almond tree, and in that small, simple, cramped house, full of old furniture and difficult stories, there was finally what the rich mansion never had: true peace, restored justice, love that cannot be bought nor inherited, but is earned with courage and faith. And that, Claire now knew, was worth more than all the imported marble, all the Murano glass cabinets, all the imported cars sleeping in a luxury garage. It was worth everything.